Live pictures of the White House, where we are told we will not hear from President Trump tonight. Tomorrow, NATO Secretary General comes to Washington to play cleanup. The war with Iran exposed a lot, mostly what lousy friends our NATO allies really are. It's not that the NATO countries didn't help us fight Iran, many did not, but many took Iran's side. Spain blocked the U.S. from their naval station and air base and forced U.S. refueling planes to fly from the U.K. all the way down around Spain and out through the Straits of Gibraltar to get to the Mediterranean. Italy blocked the American base from participating in this war. Austria, France, Switzerland all closed their airspace to U.S. military aircraft. France took Iran's side at the UN. We know that Switzerland's not a NATO country, but we added them in there. The loudest supporters of NATO should be livid. But they will not, because being mad at the feckless Europeans would ally them with Trump, and that can't happen. With us now, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and of U.S. forces, retired four-star General Philip Breedlove. All right, so I view this, General, as Europe is giving Putin this enormous gift because they don't want to anger their Muslim populations. They don't like Trump, so instead they're going to basically shoot themselves in the foot, thumb their nose at the United States, and now Trump can tell NATO and the world, look, I told you these people aren't worth fighting for.
Well, first, thanks for having me on again. And you might guess I have some opinions about this, having spent
That's why we have you here
in my life in NATO and commanding it. So I, like you and others, are disappointed at the decisions some of the what I call old NATO made in this case. Not unlike during the first Libyan raid, where our F-111s had to fly almost the same route out around France and down through Gibraltar and in to strike into Libya. So this is not without precedent. The bottom line is there are right ways to engage NATO and wrong ways, and I think part of the reason that some of the NATO nations did not participate is because of the way that we did not really engage them before. We had no Article 4, we had no common conversations, et cetera, et cetera. But here's what I want everyone to understand. There are a bunch of other nations in NATO who very much want to support the United States, but they're not the big old nations, what I call the Eastern Front nations. We know that Putin is the enemy, Russia is the enemy, and those nations that are closer to Mr. Putin, they still are very supportive of the things that the United States wants to do, and they are also very supportive of how they want NATO to support Ukraine. So when we cast a spell or a big wide net about NATO, we just have to remember that there's quite a few nations that are still in the fold and still want to do the right thing.
That is a very fair point of the eastern flank of NATO, but you think about the countries that continue to lecture the United States despite enjoying our security. This is some of the NATO leaders talking about this war. Take a listen.
Whatever the pressure on me and others, whatever the noise, I'm going to act in the British national interest in all the decisions that I make.
From here on, it is not my job to comment on the words of the American president.
France did not choose this war. We are not taking part in it, and we have a purely defensive position to protect our citizens and support our allies.
Basically, what you're saying is that America foots the majority of the bill for NATO. By far, we have the largest amount of forces that would ever be used by NATO by orders of magnitude, and yet we're the ones who are supposed to be nice and understanding and cuddly.
As I said before, Leland, I have some disappointments with what I call old NATO.
What are your disappointments?
Well, I think they could have been more helpful. They don't have to produce aircraft or things. They may not even have to produce ships, but being denied overflight rights, being denied the use of the bases that we essentially fund nearly completely, those those bases, you know them, Marone, Ramstein, et cetera, these are bases that are largely funded by the U.S. And so I think that's a disappointment and something that needs to be worked out into the future as we continue, as I would recommend, this alliance, maybe with some adjustments.
Yeah. You think it's personal, though? I mean, when you listen to the sound bites, especially from Starmer and Macron, Starmer's an appeaser, and he's got a huge issue on his left with the Muslim population, same with Macron. Do you think it's personal to Trump that they sort of would rather be seen around the world as erudite and elite than do what is in their nation's best interest?
Yeah, Leland, I don't like to do politics. I would offer that, yes, this president seems to have more issues with some of the leaders of NATO than some of our past.
Yeah.
I also remind people that this is the first president that has ever got NATO to up its investment. In the history of NATO, this is the first president to do it. So we might not agree with his procedures and his techniques, but he is the first president to get NATO to increase its investment in its own forces.
Well, and they need it, right? Military power imbalances. The United Kingdom has 221 tanks compared to the United States is 4,600. 29 multiple rocket launch systems compared to 641. A tenth of the active duty military personnel, a tenth of the military vehicles. France has 96 pieces of artillery compared to the United States is 1,800. Canada, 0 multiple launch rocket systems compared to the U.S. Denmark, 44 tanks and 0 submarines. It doesn't seem to be exactly an alliance.
On your first slide there, you didn't even hit, I think, the most important demise, and that is of the United Kingdom's Navy. Remember that the Royal Navy was a force to be reckoned with for centuries, and now it's a shadow of its former self.
Well, it's funny you say that because the HMS Dragon, which was on its way to the Middle East, the part of the Royal Navy, one of their newest ships, had to put into port because the warship was suffering issues with its water supply, affecting provisions to its sailors. This is the last question, though. NATO was set up to underpin this idea of a Western alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I know the New York Times got that wrong, but it was the fundamental a West versus East alliance, right, of Western values. That struggle still exists. Yes, Mr. Putin is there, but you now have the Eastern alliance also represented by Iran, Shia Islam, mixed with Marxist ideology. And yet, on that axis, Europe seems to be very lost as to which side they're going to take. Is that just because they have been so overtaken by their own Muslim population?
Well, I think that's part of it. I think that we have friends in Europe, and they are our friends. Although we're having a backyard scuffle at this point, we're still friends. And I think we will be for a long time. But they are fighting some pretty tough battles internally themselves. We actually have a much smaller problem than most of these European nations with this particular population. I would also remind Leland, because it's a good thought, remember a lot of people say NATO was developed to keep Russia out, keep Germany down, and keep the United States in. And we are struggling in 2 of those 3 right now. And I think we and the rest of NATO, to include old NATO, we need to invest some time in this to get it right rather than let it fall apart. That would be the greatest tragedy and the greatest gift to Mr. Putin of all times. That's what he wants, America out of NATO, and then he can start to run Europe.
Well, General, there's a lot here. I think I would say first and foremost, we understand why you were chosen to be the Supreme Allied Commander, as much of a general as a diplomat as well, sir. Thank you, as always, for the insights.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.